Vaiguru Ka Khalsa, Vaiguru Ki Fateh. Welcome to Sangat TV podcast. We have with us today Navraj from No More Pretending. Welcome, Navraj.
Thank you for having me, Simran.
Yeah, brilliant. We're really excited to have you on board today, and we've spoken about your experience and what you do. So first of all, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Navraj and I run an organisation called No More Pretending. And the point of No More Pretending is to connect South Asian communities, predominantly Punjabi communities, with alcohol recovery. So I'm in alcohol recovery myself, so I've had issues with alcohol in the past, and I found sobriety through the 12-step fellowship. And as part of the work that I've done in that organisation, I wanted to do more work connecting with the community. So I started No More Pretending as a way to kind of bridge the gap between people that need support and the services that are available.
Yeah, so you're from No Pretending, and I want you to kind of explain a little bit, how did you get into helping people?
So it really started with my journey. So for me, by the time I was 29, I was really struggling with alcohol. I was at the point where I was suicidal. And by that, I mean, I'd drink and I wouldn't want to wake up in the morning because it felt like the challenge of being me was just too much. At the time, it felt that actually sobriety was the challenge and I needed alcohol just to kind of make the issues go away. And a lot of the work we do is around challenging the misconceptions around what an alcoholic is. Because as soon as I say I'm an alcoholic, people have all these ideas as to what that is. But at the height of my drinking, I still had a great job. I was married. My wife was expecting. I was never a daily drinker. Yeah, and people are really surprised that an alcoholic has to drink every day. But the truth is, an alcoholic's just somebody that needs help with their drinking. They've lost control of their own drinking, and I'd certainly done that. And for me, I was a binge drinker. So basically, it'd be big weekends. It started off, big weekend here and there.
Was that like a social thing for you more? Is that what got you into it, or was it a personal thing that you kind of just, oh, I need a drink, or?
Well, that's the thing. It started as a social thing, like just going out with friends. But what happened with these binges were they were getting bigger and closer together. So I was probably on that journey to becoming a daily drinker. But for me, the mental aspect of it got hold of me a lot quicker than the physical aspect. So I probably had a body that had a couple of more years heavy drinking. But mentally, I was just finished. At the end, I was alone, paranoid, just full of fear. And that's what really got me into recovery.
Those feelings that you're explaining isn't something that people would admit, I guess, when you have issue of drinking and you are an alcoholic. How do you get people to realize and recognize these are things that I really need to be concerned about?
Well, like at the time, I didn't want to admit it. For me, I think the dangerous thought for me was I can't be an alcoholic. I don't drink every day. I'm smart. I'm educated. I have a good job. I thought an alcoholic is a park bench drunk. But, when I got into recovery, the simple test they said is once you start, can you stop? And I knew from early days I was always one of them big I was never a 1 or 2 drink kind of guy. It was never I'll have 1 or 2 pints. It was always all or nothing. And they said that by itself isn't a huge problem. If you're a big drinker like that, just don't have the first drink. That's where the problem was. I could never say no to the first drink. So for me, I could go a week, a month, even 2 months without a drink. But when I'd go back to it, I'd be back just hitting it just as hard as I was. And, I had all this denial, but, mentally, I just completely broke. And my journey in recovery, it didn't really start until I connected with somebody else that was an alcoholic, somebody that had been through the same thing, because they could see past the bottle. Everybody on the outside, my family could see the drink, but this person knew exactly what was going on the inside. And they didn't say anything about my drinking. They just shared their story. And I was like, that's me. That's how I think and feel. And for the first time, they were able to put into words things I'd felt all my life, before I'd even drank.
Was that by an accident, or was that when you had sought help?
That's when I'd sought help. So that's when I'd got into the 12-step fellowship. And, kind of fast forward that to today, you hear it a lot. I speak to a lot of people. I predominantly speak to families. It's always the family that get in touch. Because alcohol, it's hard. Alcoholism, it's a family illness. We can all see that person struggling with alcohol, but what we don't see are the secondary and tertiary impacts of that. And it's always the relationships and the family. And because we come from a community that's got very community-based structure, it impacts us at a community level as well. And a lot of times it's the family that are the kind of the silent victims in, certainly in my drinking. My parents suffered, my wife suffered, and a lot of my relationships started to atrophy away because I just wasn't present. I wasn't one of them people that you could rely on. Do you know what I mean? If you rang me, I just
How did they approach you, or how would they address if they'd recognize that actually this is becoming quite toxic and this is not okay? How did they address that with you? How did they deliver that message to you that, look, Navraj, this is getting out of hand? Did they have the ability to do that, or was there some sort of a barrier that they could say that to you?
no, the people were honest. My wife did voice her concerns. She could see because, and my parents as well. Like, you see it. I was that guy at the end of the party that just didn't want to go home. The family are waiting. They're sat at the table. They've got their laddu. They've got the keys. And I'm like, oh, just one more. Or I just want to go out afterwards. For me, it was never enough. And it went back to that understanding of what an alcoholic is. Once I start, I can't stop. One's never enough. No, sorry, one's too many and a thousand's never enough. Because once I start, I can't stop. And a lot of people were voicing their concerns. My employer, they were saying, like, are you okay? Because I used to travel a lot with work, so I'd always still get my work done. But they could see the behaviours outside of work. So people were addressing it, my friends as well. And I suppose I'm really lucky the group of friends that I had, they kind of saved me because they stuck around because people were starting to move away from me because of my drinking. And for me, I was like a social chameleon. I didn't just have one set of friends I could drink with because then my drinking would stand out. I'd have, different friends that I could hang around with. And if anyone ever pointed out my drinking or they started to notice, then get away from this person, find a new set of friends. And so for me, it was always about moving around and try to match people that drank like me.
Yeah. That's for you to have friends that really cared for you, I don't think that's necessarily the same for a lot of people. And moving away from drinking, I guess for some people they have to move away from that community too, and finding that balance. Do you find that is a challenge for a lot of people because they feel like they have to disconnect, and that comfort is your friends and that's all you know? How do people move from that?
Oh, 100%. So when I talk about my friends, I'm talking about my immediate friends, so about three, four people that always stuck by, but others were starting to move away. And a lot of them were fair weather friends. They were there for the drink. And certainly when I got into recovery, I had to change my friends and my playgrounds because, it wasn't safe for me to be in them environments. Like today, I can still go out, but in the early days of recovery, they always say stay away from wet places. Stay away from that temptation until until you start to go through the process of recovery. The phrase they use is if you sit in the barber's chair long enough, you're going to get a haircut. Because people will say, look, I'll go to the pub and not drink, but they'll get drunk on the atmosphere, and the camaraderie, and then people just end up going back to the drink.
I think the stories that you're sharing about yourself, that must really hit home for a lot of people, and vice versa. Almost, it's like a dominoes effect. So you heard one person share their story, and now you're sharing your story. Tell me a little bit about the work that you do in the community, about the 12 steps, um, and how that works.
Yeah, sure. Well, you just talked about it there. The essence of the 12-step process is that my step one was somebody else's step 12. So it's all about identification. So, when I first got into recovery, nobody asked me questions or how much you drink. They just shared their experience. And for me, I could identify this and look for the similarities rather than the differences. And it was in that identifying that, oh, I'm like that, or I drink. It wasn't necessarily how I drank, but it's how I thought and felt on the inside. And then it's self-perpetuating. So the way the 12-step works is as you get sober, you then help the next person and the next person. So that's all the 12-step work. What we did within the 12-step program within Birmingham, we did a lot of work around actually there's not that many South Asians coming into recovery. So we set up some South Asian focused meetings, and it was about actually having a space where people came in and they didn't feel like the only person. Because when I got into recovery, my first meeting was in the basement of a church. I was the only brown face there, and I remember just being terrified. It was like the start of a horror film. I'm the only Asian guy there. There's all these smiling gory going, are you okay? And I was thinking, what is going on? And I sat there, and the person that shared that night was, he was like a 50-year-old plumber. And I was sat there thinking, what am I going to have in common with this person? But when he spoke, it was like he articulated things that I'd never been able to put into words myself. And as time went on, we did work to kind of improve that 12-step connection with the South Asian community. But within the 12-step program, there's a set of traditions where we don't partner with outside organizations. So I wanted to go above and beyond what we did within the 12 steps. So we started No More Pretending as a way to bridge that gap, to get people into the 12-step program. You know, that it's not about me trying to create a new program of recovery, because I've got a program that works. The 12 steps work. It was about actually how can we break down the barriers to entry? How can we help re-educate the community around what alcoholism is and what recovery is?
How do you educate the community? So you're talking about breaking those barriers. What barriers are there in the way at the moment for those that may need help? And is it mainly male, or are we seeing a lot of South Asian females in this setting as well?
It's both. You know, obviously the males tend to be more visible, but you know, equally, alcoholism affects everyone the same way. You know, men, women. The way that we work is we use a lot of social media. We do things like this. It's about sharing our story so other people can identify. And that's how we kind of change the narrative, to let people know it's not about being a daily drinker. You know, it's a family illness. The family are impacted as well. And it's also to remind people it's a lifelong ailment. Just because I haven't drank for a number of years doesn't mean I'll never drink again. You know, for me, I still do today what I did in the beginning. I still go to regular recovery meetings, and it's a big part of how I stay sober. And by staying sober, I mean, it's about changing. You know, I'm not the same person I am as I came into recovery. The 12-step process is about changing as a person. It's about looking at our past and looking at the things we did and why. And then I suppose the best way to describe it is all through my drinking, I wore these different masks. You know, I tried to be what I thought the world wanted me to be, and it was exhausting. But the problem was none of these masks were me. And the longer I wore the masks, I forgot who I was. And when I talk to my friends today, they always say that, look, Nav, we always stuck around because we still loved you. We just knew you'd just lost your path. And it was just that I disconnected with myself. And what the 12 steps do is about reconnecting with myself and the people around me. It's like we're taught that, you know, we all have that jyot inside us, that light. And it's about reconnecting with that. And what was keeping me from that was myself and my ego. And it's about being able to explore that and live life in a different way. And we do that a day at a time. You know, it's not to say that I'm cured. You know, I'll always be an alcoholic. I can never safely consume alcohol ever again. But with my alcoholism today, when it comes back, it's not necessarily that I pick up a drink. It comes back in my behaviors. You know, am I being honest? Am I being open? You know, the best way to see how well I'm doing, it's never about what I'm saying. Nobody's ever as sober as they share. You know, everyone can tell a great story. It's like, what's my relationship like at home with my mum and dad, with my parent, with my wife, with my children? That's the real barometer of how well I am. And as we, as we've kind of progressed in the 12 steps, in the South Asian focused 12-step meetings in Birmingham, we are getting more and more people in, and both men and women. Initially, it was difficult for the women because it was a room full of men, and that's something we learned as well. You don't realize your own privilege until somebody kind of mentioned it. Because I remember speaking to a friend that was in recovery about the same amount of time. She's from Wolverhampton, and I said to her, like, look, we set up a meeting. Why don't you come along and support us? She's like, Nav, what's it like walking into a room full of Asian men?
You didn't see that, did you? You just like, this is my space, welcome in. And for her, it's like, okay, I'm the only female in the room.
Exactly. But that's changed. We do get regular people, and, people, that's really why we create No More Pretending, so we could kind of be vocal in the community so people can connect with us. So, we use social media. If you can reach out to us through the website, what we'll do is we'll always signpost people to the South Asian meetings. But it's more than just signposting, saying, look, oh, here's a post to go to this meeting. It's about getting somebody to connect with them and kind of break down some of them initial barriers.
Yeah, I mean, talking about and breaking those barriers, I want to go back to the beginning of this part that you just spoke about, is wanting that change. And I don't think that's something that can come really easy to people. So having that realization is step number one, that actually I do need help. And two, I do want to change. And if you're in a pattern and you're living this lifestyle, it must be hard to come out of that initially, and recognizing and seeking that help. How can someone do that might be so stuck?
So in terms of recognizing it, it's always the family and friends that diagnose any issues first. Everybody around me could see I had a problem before I could. And even today, I speak to a lot of family and friends and they'll say, so and so needs help. And I'll always say, look, let me connect with them. And I'll share my story and, I'll say, look, this is what it was like for me. And a lot of times they'll say, oh, I'm a binge drinker as well. But, they might say, but look, I'm all right now. I've got it under control. Because I genuinely thought I had it under control, early days. It wasn't until I stopped and looked back at my behavior and realized that actually I've got no control over this. I'd drink when I was happy, I'd drink when I was sad. Sometimes I didn't want to drink and I'd find a drink in my hand and I wouldn't understand why. And the problem that we have, I think one of the main problems that we have today is when people do reach out to me for help, it's the secondary and tertiary impacts of their drinking. So by this point, it's the financial issues, it's the problems at home. They might not be, partners might have left, children involved. So it gets very complicated. So, by the time someone reaches out, they're in crisis. And
It's almost it's too late now, and that's even probably puts them in a deeper hole, I guess. Not saying that it's too late, that is too late, but it could be scenarios like, what have I done? I've messed up. And that's going to take some time to fix, and may not be able to fix some part of that life, but they can fix themselves. And that's the first step.
It's never too late. There's always hope, but it starts with putting the drink down. Because what happens, it becomes self-perpetuating. I drank, there were consequences, and then we drink on the consequences. And then there's the guilt, the shame, and we do more things. And then, it just it's about breaking that cycle. And then, it can be quite difficult when somebody's in crisis, but it's not impossible. It's about getting them to put that drink down, get into change. And, in terms of relationships, within the 12-step fellowship, we never make a promise that these things will get fixed. The only thing we say is we can help with the drinking. But it's amazing what happens when you put the drink down and you become that person you used to be. It almost attracts them people back into to people's lives. So it's nobody's hope. Nobody's beyond recovery.
Yeah. I was going to say a little bit about how your Sangat is so important. And as you said, moving away from that space is so, it's hard. And attracting the right audience naturally comes into play with all of that. I think in terms of the Punjabi culture, I've seen when I've gone out, as part of my job, I capture events and stuff. I've seen people peer pressure each other to have a drink. So, for example, at Navraj, you might be going at an event or it might be a wedding. I was like, Baji, Baji, lale koro glasi, or pila. And then the guy would say, I actually don't drink, but nothing's going to happen. It could be like, it could be like. How do you deal with those kind of people that are so pushy and just don't respect your values?
That is a very big challenge, that peer pressure. And there's two sides to it, because I used to be that guy going, bila, bila. And for me, there was some of it was about, join and connect with us, because I didn't know how to connect with another person. I didn't know how to sit and do it through conversation. The only way I knew to connect with another person was let's have a drink together. So there's part of that. And the other side of it, what I always say to anybody in early recovery is, it's not that you don't go to any of our social events, because we do. We're a very social community. We have lots of events. It's about plan your evening. It's not plan your escape routes, but that's what I do. I still do it now with Christmas parties. I'll show my face. I might not stay for the full evening. I'll sit in a slightly different place. I'll say my hellos and stuff, but I'll excuse myself. Admittedly, for me in the early days, I used to lie a lot. I used to say I was on medication because I was so known for drinking. I said, like, look, guys, I can't, I'm on medicine, to the point where some of my friends actually thought I had quite a serious illness, because they were like, if he stopped drinking for medicine, something must be up. And then I had to say, well, no, I've got a problem. And they're all like, oh, we knew that. Do you know what I mean? And today, even after all this time, it's been over a decade since I last drank, there's still people I'll say, oh, go on, have one. But, I don't think there's any malice in it. They say it out of jar, but they don't realise that the impact that can have on the other person.
It's quite vast. I mean, think about what they're saying to you. I don't think they realise what you've had to do to come out of that space, and then say it's okay, it's only one. But actually for you, it's not just one. There's a whole bigger picture to that. It's how do we educate those people? Because I feel like you're either part of that or you're not part of it. And then there's like, actually, you will get judged because you don't drink, so therefore you're not valid in the space anymore. But then at the same time, you as a person, you want to belong. It's a navigation. You got to navigate that situation, um, and that could be so hard mentally for your well-being too, being accepted. And these people for a long time, and these are big challenges I guess people have to deal with and confront, because it's not just alcoholism, everything else comes with it, I guess, depression and
There's a lot of drug issues now as well. To be open and candid, there's a lot of cocaine that goes with drinking. People drink, and they're drinking large volumes, and to kind of almost reset themselves, they'll start doing coke as well. And that was a big part of my journey as well. I never did drugs without drinking, but I did the drugs to almost enable my drinking more, so I could drink for longer periods of time. And you don't realize the damage you kind of cause.
what do you mean by that? Sorry, I'm just going to go back. So you took the drugs to enable your drinking.
Yeah. So like I'd be drinking, and I could drink quite a bit, but obviously the more you drink, you start to slow down, slur and stuff. And then what the drugs did were, it was almost kind of like, it's like having a cup of coffee, and it reset you, and then I could carry on drinking longer.
And that's a common thing that happens.
You're hearing of it a lot more now, to be honest. But going back to what you were saying about that, we are social people, and it is a challenge. And what we need to educate people on is to understand what issues with alcohol look like, because it affects the recovery side as well. So, issues with alcohol are like a spectrum, so you might get some people that are problematic drinking. So problematic drinking is, they're just drinking a bit too much, and it might be affecting them a bit, like physically, getting up in the morning, or not meeting deadlines with work. Addiction is when you cross a line where you're no longer able to control it yourself. But the strange thing is, you never know when you've crossed that line, and the litmus test people say is actually, okay, if you don't have a problem, why don't you try stop drinking for 6 months, a year, and see what you like. And a lot of times, people can kind of white knuckle it for a long time, but you'll notice that they're just on edge because they're consciously not trying to drink. If it's not a problem, you just, okay, like it's like saying, I'm going to stop drinking Ribena. Okay, I won't drink Ribena. I'm not going to think about it. But with alcohol, it was very conscious that I'm not going to drink. And if I was ever not drinking at a party, it'd always be a big statement, like, oh, I'm not drinking tonight. And I just keep going on about it. See what I mean? But when people don't understand that differentiation between problematic and alcoholic, it can cause issues with the recovery side, because you may have somebody that's problematic drinking that then suddenly stops and goes, actually, this is a bit much. Problem with an alcoholic is they can't do that by themselves. And family will say, well, look, so-and-so stopped. Why can't you be like them?
I think two different narratives.
Exactly, but people don't realize it, that actually it's a spectrum that we need to understand. And where is that person on the journey? And I think the number one question I'm always asked by any family member is, why do they drink? And the truth is, there's 1,000 reasons why somebody starts drinking. But what's more important now is, how do we get them to stop? People might drink for a social event. It might be to deal with grief. It might be to take the edge off the day. You could come up with it's just when it becomes a regular thing and it starts to become problematic, when we start to rely on that thing, and then addiction becomes that thing where we're completely dependent on it. And, it almost killed me, really, thinking, my ego was just saying, you're too smart. You're too smart to be an alcoholic. But life was giving me clues. I'd regularly drink to black out, and I'd wet the bed. I'm a grown man, educated, and I'd regularly wet the bed. But I could rationalize any of my behavior.
You're married, you've got this addict, you're dealing with these scenarios, and when you think about it, you just think, whoa, like really, because me coming from a background that's not experienced that, I wouldn't know how that would feel. And just to think about that situation, how did your family or your wife deal with that? Did you hear a lot from her, like, what are you doing, Navraj?
Very bravely. And to really amplify that, my wife's side of the family, a lot of them are Amritdhari, so they don't drink. So, I'm the eldest, Joy, I'm the eldest one. So she's the eldest in her generation. This guy comes in and he's just this party animal. And it was just like, wow. I think one thing I haven't said, though, is on the outside, I was this happy, smiling guy. I was the life of the party, always cracking a joke. People couldn't see the pain inside. The smile hid 1,000 tears.
What was the pain?
Today, I kind of look back on it and kind of realize that it was the pain came from having the wrong perspective. And it might seem odd. In my drinking, I drank because of everyone and everything. You know, it was always something. I always had a reason. It was always the environment. As I got into recovery and I looked at my past and I looked at my behaviors, I actually realized it was me that was the architect of all the problems. It was me, it was me being selfish and self-centered and things that I'd actually done that kind of boomeranged. But I never looked at my part in anything. So I'd always just see, oh, so-and-so's like this. But I'd never look at my behaviors or take any accountability for it. So imagine, the best analogy for it is, imagine you're at a silent disco, everyone's got their headphones on. I was listening to my own music, dancing, and I was just bumping into everyone. And I was like, what's everyone's problem? I'm just listening to my song here. Today, recovery is it's about harmony. It's about being in harmony with my surroundings and realizing actually I take accountability for my actions today. And that can be a challenging part of recovery because I've done some not nice things. I've hurt people. Do you know what I mean? And part of the process is, amending that and saying sorry for these things. But in some cases, it's best that I don't visit them people again because, I might have caused a pain, which is best that, I just, left. And that's one of the things you realize that today I'm accountable for everything I did. I can't just say, oh, I was an alcoholic, I did X, Y, and Z. It doesn't become an excuse. We realize that's why we drink, but we're always accountable for our actions.
That's a huge step. I think that's people can't. It's not an easy thing to admit, and the fact that you're saying that, look, I have done these gultiya, I have made these mistakes, and it's okay to walk away and be like, okay, I've done it. And there's, you can't just sit on it now. You've got to move forward because those are things that can bring you back into a pattern as well. Because if you're revisiting those patterns, if you're revisiting those memories, that can bring a whole bag of emotions that may lead you to repeating a pattern again as well. So you've had to have the tools to equip yourself to manage that going forward as well, which is hard work.
That all comes from it's all part of the 12-step process. I never wanted to look at it, and like you talked a bit about the first step. So the first step is admitting we're alcoholic and our lives have become unmanageable. And in the early days, I was so broken that I would have said anything. I was happy to say I'm an alcoholic. I'd have said I was a unicorn, but what does it mean to be an alcoholic? And I had to look back at my behavior and realize that actually once I start drinking, I can't stop. And that I knew from the get-go, from the early days at university, I was always that big drink. But once I try stop, I can't stay stopped. And that was the hard part to admit. I'd lost control. When I try to stay stopped, I can't stay stopped. And what recovery teaches you is, if that's the case, if once you start, you can't stop and you can't stay stopped, what's the ultimate outcome? And that's death. So very early on in recovery, you realize if I continue the way I am, I'm going to die. So, because sometimes it can sound like, it's a very noble thing to do, recovery. It's actually, the motivation at the beginning is very selfish. It's like, actually, I didn't want to die, because I could see actually if I carry on this way, I'm not going to be here. And the truth of it is, if I'd have carried on drinking, there's no way I'd be sat here today. I've got friends that didn't actually make 40. You used to hear back in the day, like, oh, he was 50, 60. That age of people passing away, you hear some very scary numbers. People in their late 20s, people, that the drinking's progressed so much and they're causing damage to themselves. And alcohol affects people in different ways. So just because one person can drink like this doesn't mean another person can. Exactly. And it's a very comparative illness. So if you say to me, have you looked at your drinking? Yeah, but I'm not worse. I'm not as bad as so-and-so. But the problem is, you're worse than 100 other people. But there's always that one person. As long as I'm not like that. And I never realized that. I was always looking, there's always a worse person, but I was never looking at my own behavior.
Where you are as yourself, you're looking outside of that. You're looking outside of yourself, not at yourself, as you're so blinded by what's going on. It's just taken over.
Yeah, it's just completely judgmental. I was just judging everyone and everything and never looking in the mirror. You talked about patterns, and that's a big part of the process. Like, as I got on paper that certain things about my past, you could see it was very cyclic. And for me, I had this attitude that, I'd a big drink or, an event had happened or I'd cause mayhem, and then I'd say sorry to everyone and say, like, look, fresh chapter. And you'll hear it like, fresh, clean slate. Let's just start afresh. The problem with an alcoholic is if you don't look at your past, you're only going to repeat it. And that's what I was doing. Recovery made me stop. look at my past, take accountability, and start to make the changes to not repeat that. And this the essence of where the programs come from. It takes little bits from all different religions, and for me, we have something what's called a sponsor, and that's somebody. It's nothing special. It's just somebody that's been through the process, that knows where you are, and they help guide you through it. And then once you go through it, you help the next person. So it's always self-perpetuating, and a huge part of the 12-step process is step 12 is savor. It's about continuous serving. So it's a big part of it's at the heart of what our community is all about.
They do say healing is when, if you've got a problem yourself, to heal, you help someone else, and that part of Seva is a massive toolkit we're so lucky to be provided in our faith, to say do Seva, because that is healing as well. And I don't think people realize the value of that and the magic that that can create in people's and as you said, the dominoes effect. You're helping someone else, and that person will eventually help someone else, and it's just growing that that value and spreading that love and care and kindness. It's such a powerful tool, such a powerful tool.
It is. So earlier on, we were talking about that spectrum of issues with alcohol, and when somebody's problematic, so they're not alcoholic, they're problematic. I'm always a big advocate of sobriety through Seva. Just do some Seva. It gives you purpose. It connects you with others. It gets you out yourself, and it's just amazing. And there's so much Seva to be done, and there's so many great organisations. And for me today, being on the other side of that line, Seva is what keeps me sober. Connecting with other alcoholics. And my wife sometimes says, like, when I still talk to somebody coming in, she goes, "Oh, it's good what you're doing for them." I was like, the truth is, I'm doing it for me. I don't speak to these people because they might be alcoholic. It's because I'm alcoholic. And it's about getting out of myself, and that's one of the things we've done within the 12-step fellowship, is look at, if people aren't coming to, say, the likes of a 12-step fellowship or the NHS for help, where are they going? And that's why I volunteer with the Seek Helpline, so they do some amazing work. And it was about, actually, where are people reaching out for help, and where can we make sure that somebody's there that's got experience to kind of share that, and if necessary, signpost them back into recovery services.
So talking about the help that we can get out there, so if someone's listening to this podcast and they may be thinking, actually, I really relate to some of the stuff that you've mentioned and your experiences. So if they pick up the phone to, say, Seek Helpline or any other organisation, as you mentioned, what does that journey look like? So you say, "Hi, I'm Simran, and I was listening to, I need some help." What does that call sound like? What is that like on the other end?
Just keep it as simple as that. That's you can reach out to us on our website, on social media. The key thing is to ask for help. A lot of times people don't ask for help. They suffer in silence, especially the family. I always say, reach out for help, because a lot of times when I speak to family, the person drinking might not be ready to stop. I'll speak to them, and even though they might not want to stop, I just say, look, just have a 10-minute conversation with me. And I'll speak to them and share my story. I won't ask them anything. And it's about planting that seed of recovery, because 9 times out of 10, within 6 months, they'll call me or they'll text me, because I always ring from my personal number, because there'll be a point in their drinking where it's a bit much, and they know that somebody's there. Do you know what I mean? So that they'll reach out. And for the family, that's what I always say, that there's actually support for the family. So there's something called Al-Anon. So this is a 12-step fellowship for family members. And I'm a massive advocate to tell families, go to these, because what sends a stronger message than the family asking for help? If the person drinking is not ready yet, you guys find a way to get help, because
Wow, yeah, I really like that. Sorry, I'm just going to recap. So you're saying, instead of, say, this person's got the problem, the family will go to this place for help, and then they would obviously have some tools to manage that. Or
well, no, it's never about managing the person with addiction. It's about them being able to lead a happy, normal life that's not dependent on the addict, if they're using or not, because everything in the house becomes about that person. And what people don't realize is, my drinking made people around me sick, because I was lying, manipulating, doing things I had to do, I thought I had to do to get a drink. And then people adapt their behaviors. So if I'm ill and they're adapting their behaviors around that, it just becomes,
you're breaking a norm, isn't it? You're breaking, because you're so attuned with that lifestyle and those habits and that space. So those people are suddenly changing, and then you're kind of going, hang on a minute, what's going on? And is it almost that kind of effect, like that has an impact.
And then it's amazing what happens in the family meetings. People realise that, oh, actually, wait a minute, I've been doing this. I didn't realise, because I think one of the things they say in Al-Anon is the 3 C's. You know, you can't control the addict, you can't cure the addict, and you didn't cause it, because people blame themselves. Families, you know, maybe it was me. You know, for me, my addiction, in my drinking, I blamed everybody else, but it was always me. It's always me that put that drink to my mouth. You know, I could always blame the outside things, but you know, I chose to. Exactly. And there's some amazing Punjabi ladies that run South Asian focused Al-Anon groups as well. So if people are interested, please get in touch, and I'll put you in touch with them, because there's nothing stronger than peer support, somebody that's been through the same thing. And that was the same thing for me. You know, my journey of recovery, you know, my parents wanted me to stop drinking, my wife, my friends, my employer, everybody wanted me to stop drinking. Even I wanted to stop drinking, I just didn't know how. My journey didn't start until I connected with somebody that had been through the same thing. And it's so powerful, that person that understands what's going on the inside.
Amazing. I think this leads to so many things, and I appreciate you coming down to Sangat TV today podcast to share your story and how you're having a massive impact on so much of the community. Can you just recap for the organisations that you've mentioned, and we can hopefully put some of that information in the links below as well, for people that need help, because what you're sharing, not everyone can easily share their story. It is a taboo subject in some families and in a culture, and your words are going to mean so much to people, and hopefully you can change a lot sharing that. And it might be people that, you know, need a little bit of that nudge and say, yeah, but there is help out there. So if you can tell us the organisations, the main ones, how they can find them, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. Certainly for the highest level, for alcohol support, reach out to Alcoholics Anonymous. For family support, it's Al-Anon. If people are wanting more of that kind of cultural focus, you know, reach out to the Sikh helpline, because not only do they obviously deal with the alcohol side to myself, they deal with all the secondary and tertiary issues that can arise from that as well. So they provide a whole range of support, and they do fantastic work. And, you know, there's a few others that I can't think of off the top of my head, but I'll certainly provide a list of them to be shared out. But I suppose one thing I want to say, you know, thank you for your kind words, but, you know, I sit here today as one of many, you know, that I'm not unique in the fact I'm a Punjabi guy that's in recovery. There's actually lots of people in Punjab that are in recovery. As part of the 12-step fellowship, you know, there's this thing around anonymity. And one of the reasons I started No More Pretending was to have a vehicle to kind of do things like this. But you know, the work we've done is underpinned by just a network of people. No one person can make a difference in the community in this. And I'm only sober today thanks to so many other people. Do you know what I mean? Like that, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't thanks to the people in Bradford. And it's not just Punjabi people, you know, my journey to reconnect with my Sikh, with the Punjabi community, started in the basement of a church.
Yeah. It's community, isn't it? You know, you all want, ultimately, everyone wants the same thing. They want some peace, they want some contentment, you know, they want to find themselves. And you've done that without looking at who am I, who are you? We've all got a problem, and we're just here crying for help. And how do you do that? Because someone's shared their example, so therefore you've been able to connect. And, you know, we don't need barriers, you know, to help each other. We need to, as you said, it's a way for them to connect and seek help, and you know, on the way to recovery.
Exactly that. Look, alcoholism's one alcoholic can always connect with another one. One thing I always say when I'm working with the likes of the NHS is that we've got more in common than we've got different. You know, we're always having a human experience. We've all got more in common than we've got different. However, we can't trivialize the impact of the differences. We do have that layer of culture on top, and it drives different sets of beliefs, traditions. And one of the things that I'd work with other services around is improving their cultural literacy. It's about moving from a model where they say what's wrong with you to understanding what matters to you. You know, if you don't understand the person, how can you help them? You know, and it's about helping bridge that gap between the communities and the services. Because the services, a lot of times you'll hear terms like hard to reach communities. And a lot of talks that I give is around shame and stigma. Shame and stigma are not unique to the South Asian community. Every community has shame and stigma around alcohol and addiction. It's just one of them things. No community's happy about addiction. Do you know what I mean? That shame and stigma exists across all communities. And what's happened is that it's almost like a surface level analysis to say, oh, it's shame and stigma stopping these people coming into recovery. Whereas actually there's more to it. You know, there's other cultural barriers that are stopping people. And it's about going, actually, we need to explore these. And look, I sit here, we've been working in this space for some time now, and nobody's got a solution yet. We're still in the problem defining phase. We're still trying to figure out, what all them cultural barriers are and how we can overcome them. And that takes people from different areas, clinicians, people in services, end users coming together and working out actually what are the hindrances that are stopping these people, stopping communities getting help, because we're not a hard to reach community. Because when you speak to the community, I know hundreds of people crying out for support, thinking that support's not for me. They'll go into a room and go, there's no other apnea there. Or, due to funding, if you look at a lot of the kind of national alcohol support services, drug and alcohol have been combined together. So you might be going there for drink issues and see an opiate user and go, oh, that's an addict. I'm not like that. The truth is, addiction's addiction, but we've got to look at these things. What are stopping people from getting help?
Yeah, interesting. It's really weird if you're putting these addicts in, but we still want a label, don't we? We don't want to be labeled under anything. And it's like, actually, you're worse than me. And then I guess that cycle won't break if you're not willing to think, actually, it's not that person that's going to do what I'm not as bad as that person. Is actually realizing, where am I in this space and where I'm at right now? What am I doing?
Well, look, labels are very interesting. What a big thing we have to realize is that the term alcoholic is very loaded. I always say it a bit. I say it, and I just know people's reactions today when I say, because they've all got an idea of what an alcoholic is. And I know some people in recovery that'll say, yeah, I might have a problem with drink, but I'm not an alcoholic. The NHS don't use alcoholic; they use alcohol use disorder. For me, it was very important to say that I was an alcoholic. For me, that label was it was foundational to my recovery, because it differentiates me from a normal drinker. I'm the youngest. I'm the youngest of four, so I'm the baby of the family. I've got 3 older brothers. No problems with alcohol.
Is it because it hit you harder? Is it because it gave you a realization, actually, this is not okay? Do you think it's the brutality of
For me, it was understanding that I don't drink like normal people. Yeah, it's like saying, it's like hay fever is a term. So I've got hay fever. It differentiates me from people that don't have a problem with pollen. As an alcoholic, I'm just somebody that had issues with alcohol that can't drink again, and that's why I continue to use it now. And that's one of the misconceptions that people have. Like, I'm the youngest of 4, I'm the baby of the family. I grew up just wrapped in cotton wool. Not only am I the baby of my family, I'm one of the youngest in the generation. So my chache, and we got a big family. And I was just, if you look at my baby albums, there's me and another cousin. There's 6 days between us, but there's just hundreds of pictures of just everyone holding us. So we were I brought up just surrounded in love, because a lot of times people think you must have had a really traumatic upbringing. I'm like, not really, no. Yet my relationship with alcohol is completely different than my 3 older brothers.
It's interesting, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's an assumption that actually, you've become, you're saying you were an alcoholic, and actually, you must be this. You must have gone down that avenue because you've come from an X, Y, and Z kind of background, and you're carrying all this trauma with you. And in fact, actually, it's a habit, and it's an internal journey that you've got trapped into, and you just never knew a way to escape until that person approached you. So it's all, and you've said it's you, and it's you realizing how you've got stuck in that situation and coming out of that. It took another person sharing their story, and they thought, oh my God, that's me. It's like looking in the mirror.
Exactly. Look, recovery is such a personal journey, and access isn't the only issue. Like last year, I lost a close family member to alcohol, and then they knew how long I'd been in recovery, and
I'm sorry.
still not something I've been able to make sense of. It's still something I struggle with, but what it highlights is that all I can do is get sober myself and be an example to others. I can't get sober for anyone else. I can't get anybody else sober. And that's one of the challenges when speaking to family members, because they're like, can you do something? And I know what they mean, but it's almost like they've got to have that willingness. Recovery takes a willingness to change, and once people realize there's a lot of denial at the beginning. My willingness came when I realized that if I don't change, I'm going to die. You know, over time though, that motivation change, it sounds quite negative. You know that.
Can I just go back? You're saying that if I don't change, I won't die. If you don't, sorry, if you don't change, I was going to die. When you say that, do you mean in terms of your intoxicating your body die, or do you mean that there were thoughts coming up? Sorry.
You know, I would either physically have not been able to carry on, or it would have been suicide. There's no way I would have been able to continue. And learning about my illness, learning that actually I can't stay stopped, reinforced that idea that I'll just keep drinking until, you know, and I've seen that happen, and I think it's one of the hardest things to see. I think it's only in losing family that you realize just the pain and anguish of family seeing someone, because you're seeing this loved one slowly deteriorate. And if you're not in addiction and you don't understand it, it's just, how can a liquid in a glass kill someone I love? Why are they doing this to themselves? And you know, my wife will sometimes ask me, like, you know, why do you guys just carry on? You know, when all this, you know, you're causing all this chaos and pain. And I was like, and I say to Pam, like, imagine all that pain outside. Well, the pain inside must be more.
Yeah.
That's why they do it. All you're seeing is stuff on the inside, outside. You don't see what's going on the inside. And today, look, still the same wife, family. You know, I'm still in the same environment that I was in my active addiction. But today I've just got a different perspective. Today I don't blame everyone and everything. I'm accountable for my actions. I take responsibility for my relationships. You know, I'm a son, I'm a dad, I'm a husband. I'm all the things I couldn't be in drinking. You know, because in drinking, you know, I was never a violent drunk, but I was absent. That's a form of abuse in itself. You know, I missed key things with nephews and nieces. And
But then there's also the side of being, being a heavy drinker, not able to control those things, and then leading to abuse, leading to domestic violence, and all of these things that come on with that. You know, we haven't even touched on that.
yeah,
and the things that come along, not being able to control yourself.
It's such a huge subject, because, you know, once you get into the throes of addiction, these secondary and tertiary aspects of it, it just kind of mushrooms out. And that's why, you know, the focus of our work is that making the change in the community, kind of changing community attitudes towards drinking and towards recovery. Look, I'm not here naive enough to think we're going to solve the problem, but if we can just make sure people know that help's there, you know, the hope, I've got 2 young girls, and the hope for the future is that I'll never be able to keep them away from alcohol and even drugs, if we're being realistic. They're so openly available. But what I can teach them is to make the choice that if they ever find themselves in trouble, they know that they can ask for help. Yeah, we can't change, we can't take the availability of it away, but we can at least educate her to say that there's no need for them. Do you know what I mean? Or if you are struggling with something, just ask for help. You know, we buried too many people that struggled in silence. You know, and a harrowing statistic is, I think Punjabi men have the highest rate of suicide in the country.
Yeah, it's scary.
That's it. And what are the relationships with depression, alcohol, addiction? We're only slowly uncovering these things. But the key thing is that, like, look, don't suffer in silence. Saying that, I think when I think back to my early journey, though, what the 12-step fellowship gave me was a place where I could be open, honest, and vulnerable. That's great if you know how to do it. I sat there as a Punjabi man, and I didn't know how to do it. It took me months of listening to other people's stories. My initial sharing was patchwork of other people's stories, because I was, oh, that's me. I never knew how to articulate my emotions or what I was feeling or what they meant.
How did you start doing that then?
Listening to others.
So listening to others, and then you got was it building the confidence to say, actually, I can speak about it?
Well, yeah, it was learning how to speak about it. You know, I'm always one to talk. I always loved to talk, but I didn't know how to talk about it. And that's something I had to learn in recovery through listening to others, listening to their stories, listening like, oh, I felt like that. That was me. And when I examine it, I didn't know how to speak about my emotions because my dad didn't know how to speak about his emotions. And amazingly, My granddad didn't know how to speak, and then and what recovery's given me is I can break that cycle today. Like today, I can speak about these things, and I can speak quite clearly with my daughters about my emotion, but also with my dad. And it's one of them things that recovery's brought into my life.
That's huge. When you're raised in a certain way, these patterns, you inherit those patterns, and that's all you know. That's how you become. You don't know any other way. So you have to unlearn things to learn new things. And that's hard work as well. Like when you think about the journey you have to go through, it's how and people, not everyone's going to know what tools they need to be able to do that. And I guess the work that you do, you are equipping those people with all of those things that they need to move forward and break out of that toxic cycle that they're in.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what recovery is. It's having these tools at our disposal and knowing when to use them. But saying that, it all comes back to Sangat though, because my mind can rationalize anything. If I look back at my behaviors from my drinking, from wetting the bed, and I could rationalize that as a grown adult, going, "Oh, it's all right. It's this, that, and the other." And that still happens today. Just because I'm in recovery doesn't mean that that's changed. And that's why it's so important to have my Sangat around me, because they know and they can see it. And by Sangat, it's not just my friends in recovery, it's friends outside of recovery as well. It's my wife as well. They can see when I'm a little off kilter, I'm a bit irritable. And we talk about these key times, they call it hungry, angry, lonely, tired. These are states you've got to be careful of, because we end up going in ourselves a little. Do you know what I mean? Especially when you're hangry. How many people get hangry? And
It's me every day.
but that's the thing is, and I'm aware of these things today. And I think one of the most powerful tools I've got today is my phone. I can pick up the phone and connect with another alcoholic. My phone's just full of people. And the beauty of the fellowship is I've got people that genuinely care. So like, I'll go to a meeting and I'll look tired and somebody will say, "Oh, how are you doing?" We all say, "Oh, I'm okay." But in recovery, they'll ask again, they go, "How are you really doing?" I'll go, "I'm okay." And they'll be smiling, and they'll be a bit later and they say, "Should we ever talk afterwards?" And then that's it, It's almost you get into recovery and you give permission to people to keep going. Yeah.
You know how it's going to start and how you get.
Well, look, that's how it starts. Like for me, it took me a while to find my voice in recovery, but it was always about talking to people before the meeting and after the meeting. They call it the meeting before the meeting, and then afterwards. Do you know what I mean? At the end, I'd sheepishly kind of hang around and slowly build my confidence and talk. And in time, I just kept coming back. And then that's what brought us to today.
Yeah. There's so many things that you touched on, the suicide, the domestic abuse. We thought about drugs. There's so much things that I think we can hopefully talk about next time. Maybe we can have you back and touch on those, because I think those are really key things that we don't really talk about. And I think there are people listening that know of or have been and need that help. But I think we've had a really, really good discussion on your organisation and your journey, which has been, really inspiring to hear, actually, because you so humbly and honestly put your vulnerable stories out there for the audience to listen to, and that's not easy. So for you to be able to sit here and share that, it takes a lot. It takes guts. So thank you so much for sharing so much of your story.
No, and thank you to you guys for having me and giving me a platform to share just a bit of my experience, and hopefully others can identify it and start their journey of recovery.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Navraj. And again, for those listening to Sangat TV podcast today, we are going to ensure that we add all the links to the helps and resources that Navraj has mentioned today. If you do need help, please do reach out. Pick up the phone, drop an email where you can, and reach out for help. There's always someone out there looking to help you. Don't feel like you're alone. There is people out there that you can connect to get you on a really good, positive journey, okay? Thank you so much. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.